What does circumcision of the heart mean? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the Northwoods, talking about Bible topics one small step at a time. My whole goal in all of this particular podcast, is sometimes there's theological phrases and words and things that confuse us. And I can tell you that when I was doing the Bible in small steps, when I got to this particular chapter, I did a lot of research on it because it is a confusing phrase for sure. And sometimes we want to know exactly what it means for us. Should we still get circumcised or have our children circumcised? Does it mean that we're supposed to be doing something else that we're not doing? And when we look through all, the logics of when it comes to circumcision and this phrase, it can be really confusing in general for us. The circumcision of the heart comes from this concept, I think, that Moses initially anticipated Israel's desire to keep breaking the covenant. He saw it when he was with them all this time. And so he presses them to have obedience and loyalty to God. And he uses the language circumcision of the heart, which was used for the first time at that point. And so it's not a Paul thing that he invented. It was something that was used for forever, for a long time. And it pinpoints a fundamental problem with our fallen condition. We keep trying to fall. We keep trying, I think in general, let me try to give it a modern thing, that back then when you got circumcised, you're showing, my heart and my obedience is with God. But then rituals become rote in the way that they do. So you may, think about how like even TV shows sort of make a mockery of the way weddings are. It's a thing for me to look pretty and my husband to look handsome, and we're going to take a video of it so I can watch it over and over again. And instead of the heart thing, right? We're going to take something that had a deep meaning and we're going to turn it into something either that we do for wrong reasons or we do because we're just supposed to do it. And something that we have to do. I know kids who got, put, through the different rituals in the church, and they were just doing it to please their parents. There's no heart there. And when we look at that, we see that this concept of circumcised in the heart is sort of a spiritual regeneration that we return to love with God. When Moses spoke it, to the nations, they were about to enter the promised land. He declared that it's very important for them that they understand the truth of God. That after all this time of wandering through the desert, the people of God, now we're ready. We're ready to enter the place where God promised to those people, intended, for them so that they could be representatives of Him on earth. And so he was trying to give them this message to sort of prepare it. When we look at circumcision of the heart, there's this idea that sort of kind of just, explains it a little bit. The second half of the verse sort of puts light on the first half of it. And the idea is that don't be stiff-necked, right? Stiff-necked or obstinate. Don't be unloving. Don't be firm in your sin. And a Bible scholar named Moshe Weinfeld said something to the extent about that in Jeremiah 6:10, there's this idea of the uncircumcised ear, the uncircumcised lips in Exodus 6:12 and 30, meaning it's an organ incapable of doing the right thing, incapable of absorbing that love and obedience from God. Circumcision of the heart represents this transformation that addresses sort of the deepest fundamental human problem that we have. This idea that our core humanity's fallen condition, rooted back from the beginning of time, that we have fallen, that we are no longer in it with the heart. The heart is, and again, the seat of intelligence, emotion, our willpower, and the heart is deceitful above all things and in need of what Christ's love needs for us to actually do. And that idea is that we are using these as metaphors, right? We talk about lips, we're not talking about the flesh. We're talking about the heart. We're not talking about the thing that pumps blood through our veins. It's that core of us. It's the core of who we are. That's what we talk about. And so when we talk about the circumcision of the heart, it brings in this imagery of the physicality, the deepness of how we should believe and love and be obedient to God. When Israel had this idea of, circumcision, when that became the popular thing, it was that circumcision was there. It was something that happened among surrounding nations. But what God did is he took it and he invested spiritual significance into it, put the covenant he had with Abraham and tied them together as a seal of righteousness received by faith, right? Not by works, but by faith. Abraham was a man of faith. He did what God told him to do before he understood what it was, where he was supposed to go. And that spiritual dimension, sort of pictured with a physical being in it, the idea is that each heart must be pierced by the Holy Spirit and set aside, right? Protected, be holy for God himself. And so to circumcise the heart means really, in the end, to becoming receptive and obedient to God's commandments. That's the end of what it really is, what it's supposed to be. But the process to get there, the transformation, is a trip. It's a journey of our lifetime. It means that the Spirit regenerates our heart, produces love for God, produces love, I think, for each other. Moses demanded that his people be loyal, but transform their inner lives, not how they just treat each other loyally or treat God with loyalty, but respond to how they respond inside of them. That readiness to be faithful, that readiness to be obedient to God. And spiritual circumcision then belongs not to human effort, but again is a gift from God. It cannot be achieved through gradual self-improvement or incremental moral progress. The idea is that this is something that God offers to us. He is the great circumciser in this. So when Paul refers to this later, because Moses started it out, understanding Christ's crucifixion as the fulfillment of what circumcision represents, that Christ's body is put off when he died under the curse of Calvary for all of our sins, right? The body is gone. Through the union of Christ with believers, that circumcision is already completed. It's already done. And that makes the physical circumcision unnecessary. This ancient rite that was to point our inner selves towards God can only be accomplished through divine action. It wasn't working, right? People were getting circumcised and then doing absolutely the wrong thing. And so this idea of a ritual that was an outward appearance didn't slow down our sinful ways. It didn't slow down our resistance to God's work with us. And so I think when we think about circumcision, the first thoughts might be, 1, ouch, 2, covenant. You are giving something costly, something that costs you, so that you can say, here's a physical manifestation of my love for Scripture. But most people don't even do that anymore. Now it's like a medical procedure, something you just do. Or if it's not a medical procedure you just do, it's just something rote we just do because everyone does it. Or, in my faith or in my family, or maybe you just don't even do it at all. But it was meant to be a sign of the covenant, a mark that you belong to God, an identifiable way that you are a descendant of Abraham and involved in sacrifice, giving up something deeply personal, permanent, irreversible, painful, so that your relationship and your covenant relationship is with God. There's a lot of things that God could have chosen as a symbol that could have been external, could have been something else, could have been something easy to wear or remove. But instead, he chose this covenant that involved physical sacrifice. And it reminds me, too, of the sacrifices at the temple, right? So when you were offering up something at the temple, it was supposed to be meaningful to you. You were giving up food. You were giving up security. You were giving up a future provision. Eventually, that lamb was going to provide a week's full of food for your family. Or it's painful because you like that little lamb. He's adorable. He didn't do anything to anyone. And what you're saying is, yeah, that's Jesus. Giving up something completely innocent, completely that had nothing to do with this, paying the price of blood was an indicator of how bad sin was, how painful sin was, how much sacrifice we had to do. Didn't even scratch the surface of how much sacrifice we have to do, but instead was pointing and eventually also became rote. I'm just going to go to the temple. I'm going to give someone a couple coppers and he's going to give me a couple doves. And so then that sacrifice became rote and useless too. But the point was always the same. Circumcision, personally costing, personally painful to you. The sacrifice at the temple, costly, expensive. And everything belongs to God. And everything, when we offer something up to God, has to cost, has to show us we understand the depth of the pain that sin causes. And when we just turn it into a ritual, it means we don't even do that. It starts to fade. Circumcision gets practiced, and then people just do it for whatever reason. Animal sacrifice was done, but people are like, well, it's just what we have to do. And then their hearts are gone from it. And so if you think of that idea that, this idea of circumcision was given as a commandment to Abraham, and Joshua then reinforced it. Other people, the Egyptians, also circumcised their male children in there. But like I said, it wasn't until we get to Romans 2:29 where we start speaking in the New Testament of circumcision of the heart, because we want to become inwardly what God made the Jews to be. We are marked out for God's purpose now. It's not replacement. We're not replacing what that is, but we are now part of that covenant, and we are marked out inside of our spirits. And I think that it changes the nature because we change who we are. And as soon as we have, like I said, any sort of ritual, it starts out painful, it starts out meaningful, and then it loses all its meaning to a group of people. There were even some people at periods where Jewish people tried to undo sort of the marks of circumcision. That is in 1 Maccabees 1:11 through 15. We also, and you might say, well, that doesn't even make sense, but you understand why. Think about World War II. If there's an identifiable way of determining you are Jewish and you should be sent to a concentration camp, you probably want to undo it. The people in Maccabees was a little bit different, but the same idea comes. And so obedience then becomes just hollow. It becomes nothing. And that's, I think, what we struggle with today. When God gives us commandments of things that we're supposed to do and things that we're supposed to perform, we lose sight of its meaning. The obedience becomes mechanical or ritualized. Think about tithing. Well, how much do I have to give? What is the exact dollar amount do I have to give? Well, and the best way to do it, obviously, is to put it in your bank account and have it automatically withdraw so you never see the money and it just becomes, done correctly. But then it kind of makes you wonder, are we really giving out of the heart anymore? So that's just kind of the nature of human spirit. And we saw that, too, with the prophets. When Jeremiah speaks of circumcision, he introduces this new idea because he's calling out a problem that the people are not having a problem with the physical act anymore. Their hearts are hardened. They are in rebellion all the time. He was the weeping prophet because his people were doing such terrible things. And so if someone can do an outward sign and still resist God inwardly, then exactly what it is are you doing anyway? In the end, a circumcised heart is the one that opens up to God, responds to him, capable of loving God, and is ready to set his heart towards obedience. We're not going to do it perfectly because we're still sinful beings. But when you don't do that, any ritual, whether it's going to be circumcision, temple, sacrifice, or tithing at church or whatever it is, it loses all purpose. And so the heart is always the goal. That was always the goal that God wanted. He never wanted, and he said so, human sacrifice. we talk about the Old Testament, as if there was suddenly this external obedience, and the New Testament shifts the whole thing around, but it's not true at all. God has always wanted the heart. God has always wanted us to do it. And physical circumcision, it was the idea that you were doing this because you were going to be a changed being. The heart was going under surgery, even though that's not where it was at. It involves repentance, humility, and surrendering, and instead it just became nothing. And when we circumcise our heart, or we understand what it means to let God circumcise our heart, what it removes from us is pride and self-reliance and trust in identity or performance or what we look like and how important we are. And it removes the resistance to change. And that's the kind of obedience that hurts all the more, not because God is cruel, but because healing from our old selves hurts a lot. And that's where it gets clarified. Part of it, Paul eventually clarifies this whole thing. And when we reach the New Testament, the debate about circumcision becomes really intense. Paul goes to Jerusalem, Peter's there, and they have this debate with the head of the Church of Jerusalem, which is going to be the most prestigious church. Is circumcision still a marker? Is it something that we should still do to define that we belong or don't belong? And what Paul ended up doing is defending against circumcision, that people who are Gentiles do not have to be circumcised. It is not a path towards heaven. And this was an interesting debate because Paul was a Pharisee. He would have probably fought for circumcision anytime he could. And so then some other information that I found out in the meantime, and this is why there's no video on it right now because I'm inserting this a little bit later, is that why did Paul circumcise Timothy in Acts 16? And why didn't he circumcise Titus? So here's the background of that. First of all, the Jewish communities in that region would know probably that Timothy's father was Greek, that his mother was Jewish, which means he is Jewish, just like I'm Jewish. My mom is Jewish, my dad is not. And so I was considered to be Jewish. I had to have a bat mitzvah, according to my grandmother, and my life would have looked a little bit differently had my parents been swapped around in that particular case. Same thing with Timothy. Paul was going to send Timothy to go speak to the synagogues. And if he's going to do that, him not being circumcised would have been an obstacle to the people in the synagogue. Kind of makes you wonder, how would they know? But they would know. So that's the whole idea. An uncircumcised Jewish man, according to the synagogues, would have caused offense. And they would have rejected any message he had. So by circumcising Timothy, it would make him acceptable so he could go speak to Jewish people and the synagogue people where he was going to be sent. And that means that it was cultural, it was acceptance, right? Remember that when we talked about, when Paul talked about this in 1 Corinthians 9, he says, to the Jews I become a Jew. To the Greek, I become a Greek. I'm all things to all people. I talk to people, essentially, where they're at, who they are. I don't sit there and be a fake person or be someone else, but I try to make my message as appealing as I possibly can to the people I'm talking to. That's what we were doing here with Timothy. And Logos Software points out that essentially this happened after the council in Jerusalem. That was Acts 15. In Acts 16, this is where we're talking about Timothy and the circumcision. So it was already decided in this council in Jerusalem, circumcision was not a necessity to be a follower of Christ at all. So we're set with that. Now comes Titus. Titus was a Gentile. Circumcising him would have, first of all, not impressed the synagogues. It would not have impressed Jewish people. They would know he was probably just doing it so that he could speak to them. But the problem is it gives completely the wrong message. We saw how many times that Paul ran across what we called Judaizers who were making Christians follow through Jewish hoops to become Christians, saying the path to Christ is through Judaism. And that was decided no. if Titus were to get circumcised and suddenly the Gentiles would think, well, you did it to him. Now I have to do this. And the whole misunderstanding of whether or not Gentiles had to get circumcised is out the door because you did it to that guy. So this way, he is being culturally flexible and removing barriers to talk to various people, while at the same time being culturally sensitive to what's going on. So in the end, what Paul is saying is always consistent. If it means something to you, do it. If it doesn't mean anything to you, then don't do it. If you think that you can rest on your laurels by doing it, then don't do it, because now you're adding in a step to salvation that didn't exist. You stand firm that it doesn't mean anything and that you shouldn't have to do it, then don't do it. So this really is now just whether it's meaningful to you, whether you want to do it for medical reasons, I'm not getting into all of that. Paul wants the option that some people could have it done while it's not mandatory. And again, it is essentially just that, cultural. I brought up this point in, talking about this, that I was rewatching some of The Chosen, right? And some of The Chosen points out that Matthew was given tassels, which was part of Jewish tradition. And after he's been following Jesus a while, he decides he's going to put on those tassels. And then I started thinking, well, why would he do that? He knows he doesn't have to. We now know you don't have to do these things. But Jesus wore tassels. So why would both these men who know they don't have to do it, do it? And that is because they were part of the Jewish community. They were removing the barriers. To them, to Matthew, it was meaning a realignment towards God that he had given up years ago. And so he is now, as a Jewish male, showing respect. The same way someone would if they wore a yarmulke inside of a temple. The same way I did when I went to Jerusalem. There were many places I had to wear a hair covering to go into certain holy sites. It's not my faith. I don't believe I have to do that, but I'm being respectful to the people I am visiting. So I think in the end, hopefully that helps show why Paul believes that it can happen to Timothy and not to Titus. And when Paul now has this teaching and starts writing these letters telling people, there are groups of people coming to you and telling you you have to be circumcised and you don't have to be. He doesn't throw out the covenant language, and he's not just dismissing the obedience we're supposed to do. What he is clarifying is saying what the plan that God has for us now and the circumcision of the heart is what God has always been doing. Romans explains that true circumcision is a matter of the heart done by the Spirit and not by human effort. That's the end of it. Circumcision of the heart is something done by Christ. We don't achieve it through our discipline, our rule keeping, our rituals. It involves us putting away our sinful nature, which is something we can't do perfectly on our own, but God, through his own Spirit, can. When the heart is circumcised, we worship by the Spirit of God. We stop placing our lives in our own confidence, in our own flesh, in rituals, in heritage, in moral performance, in my fancy robe I have, in any kind of identity at all. The ritual was never the goal. Having a nationality was never the point. To having an outward sign that defined your nationality was never the point. Instead, the point is that your heart belongs to God. I did some research and I did some various investigations, and one thing I turned to was the Yale Anchor Bible Dictionary, I think that's made by InterVarsity Press. And it explains that for Christian believers who are circumcised by Christ through a circumcision that was made without hands. In other words, it's spiritual instead of physical. The physical act is now unnecessary as a religious requirement. And the idea is that the spiritual circumcision was always necessary and is still necessary today. That removes the sinful human nature. That is the gift of renewal, that we were created in righteousness, and both Jews and Gentiles are saved by the same grace, both justified through the same faith, apart from obeying any law. And so the practical implication of this is important, that circumcision today is a medical procedure. It's not a religious requirement. What matters today is a spiritual transformation, a reorientation of the heart towards God that transcends everything else. Are we facing God? Are we facing our looking forward to God and lining up? And so I found this other metaphor that helped me in all of this. David Guzik, who is a pastor out in Santa Barbara, he has a fantastic commentary, which you can find online. You can also buy it on Logos, where he compares circumcision and baptism to a label on a can. He says that if the label on the outside doesn't match what's on the inside, something's really wrong. You can put a label that says peas on a can of carrots, but that doesn't change what's inside into peas. Being born again is what changes the inside of our cans. And that label makes sense. When we align ourselves from our outside labels to our inside labels, we can finally become the thing that we were meant to be. And so that image really stuck with me as I was doing research about that. And so this question came along because it came along with a question from a listener. I hope that helps answer the questions that you had. And I hope it helps all of us understand this theological issue a little bit differently. God, in the end, was never interested in labels without transformation. All right, everyone, thanks so much. Appreciate you being out there. You can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. You can talk about a topic. If you had a question, or if you think I got something right or got something wrong, or thought about something a little bit differently, I'd love to hear from you. You can put comments right here in the chat channel too. Just say hi. Thanks so much and have a great day.